Okay, we got loads of questions in here. Year on from, I'm guessing MT. I'm guessing he is manipulating my brother. How can I help my brother? Yeah, listen, it's really difficult to help family members see what's going on without ending up being scapegoated yourself. So being a bit of a truth seeker and being the one that's talking the truth is difficult. I often say that the best way to help people that still seem trapped in it is to show them how good your life is, having freed yourself from it. If you go in and start trying to pull them out too much, you'll end up getting scapegoated. You'll end up, being made to seem like you're the crazy one. So you almost have to show them how good your life is, show them that you are finding freedom free from the abuse, and hope that they'll see that. How do we manage toxic family dynamics when a grandparent is dying? Assuming you mean the grandparent, do you mean the grandparent is the toxic one? Give me a bit more information on that one and I'll come back to it. How to find stability when your core parents don't give you your needs and they hurt you. They don't seem to take accountability and care. This is really hard. So what we do in Inner You, what I've written in the book, in my book as well, when we get to the stage of healing our relationships, ultimately, and this is horrible, right? Because I believe that everybody should have at least one loving, nurturing parent, right? The only love, probably the only time love should be unconditional is when it's from a parent, right? Arguably. And so if you don't have that, you have to first mourn that, right? You have to first validate and understand that that is a really awful, difficult situation that will impact you for the rest of your life. All right? I'm not one of these people online that's going to be like, oh, you can fucking free yourself from it and, don't let it affect you. And as long as you do this, you don't have to feel if you don't have somebody that you can call a mum or that you can call a dad, and you never had that, and they did the opposite, that's horrific. That's horrific. You're a fucking human being. You're not a spiritual fucking God who finds a place to not be affected by something. We don't get over these things. We find ways to live with them, okay? And you talked about how do I find balance? How do I find stability? You find stability by beginning to invest in yourself. You have to come back to your heart and start at your heart, because what a toxic parent does is essentially, when you were a child, they steal your heart, right? They steal your heart. They take your heart and they use it for themselves, all right? And then when you reach maybe normally around your sort of teenage years and you start to really try and find your autonomy, if you're the one who speaks the truth, that's normally when it happens, and you start to break free, what they then do, they go from taking your heart and using it for themselves to trying to break it, to trying to stomp it, to trying to smear it. And they will do that consistently, whether you're contact, no contact, whatever, they will always do that. That's what toxic and horrible people are like, right? This is just the truth of what I believe to be the truth of the situation. So the way that you try and find some stability is you come back to your own heart. You retake ownership of your heart. You come into yourself. How do I find ways to be in my body again? How do I start to find out who I am in relation to myself? Yeah? Because when we grow up in dysfunction, by the way, when we grow up in dysfunction, what happens is we don't know how to love ourselves free from other people. When people say be yourself, if you grew up in dysfunction, you only learned to be yourself in how you made others feel. Because the center of the house wasn't you, the center of the house was the dysfunction. And so you only learned how to relate to yourself by how funny you were, how likable you were, how useful you were, how quiet you were, how whatever that dysfunction in the house needed you to be, you only learned to be that. That's why in your adulthood, maybe you work really hard. Maybe you're fucking caring for everybody else all of the time, because your sense of self-worth, your whole personality is built around how you relate to other people. So you find, this is a really long answer, you find stability by coming back to yourself. How do I reconnect with my inner child? And that, by the way, is what we do within You. We start in the now. We go, how do I work out everything that I've done, how do I work out what I've been, why I've showed up in the way that I am, all the different versions of myself, so that I can go back and get my inner child, all right? So I can go there, and when I meet them as a healthier version of myself, and I make them feel safe, all right? Now, side point, just really quickly before I go into another question, big side point, we don't run off into the sunset when we've been dealt these cards. All right, you don't run off into the sunset. Well, some people do. Listen, some people tell me that they do, and that's great. But not everybody does, man. Not everybody does. And I think that the people that hurt the most when they've grown up in dysfunction tend to be the ones who feel very deeply, tend to be the ones who say truth. Yeah? And I didn't grow up with toxic parents as such. My dad was an alcoholic and died when he was young. But like anybody, there was a level of dysfunction. And I remember as a child fucking upsetting adults a lot, like saying shit, and adults around me being upset and annoyed at me, and me thinking, I thought I was just saying the truth. And I feel like, by the way, we've othered people that say the ultimate truth because our society has become so uncomfortable with the ultimate truth that what you start to realize is that most adults sort of canoodle together to hide from the ultimate truth. And so we all sort of do this, like, turn up as a different version, sweep everything under the carpet. So when I was a kid and I just was saying truth and it was upsetting people around me, I was scapegoated. I was made to feel like I was the crazy one. Why are you saying this? Why don't you do that? And it took me a long time to come and do work on myself and come back to myself and think, hang on a minute, man. I'm saying the truth. And what you realize is how much society doesn't want the truth. Society wants the easier, softer way. Society wants, yeah, I know that's bad, but let's sweep it back under the carpet and pretend everything is okay. You become the outcast for being honest, open, and true. Very well said. How can we heal from the pain of feeling abandoned by our parents? Yeah, I guess I kind of talked to that already a little bit. But, like, again, I want to always validate this, yeah? I want to always validate this. The answer you will have got if you were abandoned by your parents, in most circumstances, if you talk to people about that, if you tell people about that, the answer that you probably get in most circumstances is one that tries to repackage your parent to you. Why do we do that to people? Why do we say to somebody, if somebody says my parents abandoned me, like they were never there for me, right? Like, why do we then say to these people, why do we try and repackage their truth? Oh, you know, they were just doing their best. You need to look at their trauma and you need to, like, see and understand that they never meant it. It's like, hang on a minute. We might get there. We might get there. We might look at their trauma. We might want to understand that down the route. But why can't anybody just for a moment come here, where I am now, and validate my truth? Validate the fact that you might have grown up with a mum or a dad who really fucking didn't care about you and in fact used you as a pawn in their story. Now, do not get twisted. There's a lot is probably, there are parents that are like this. There are parents that are like this. And we have to understand this. Now, somebody just said in that, that forgiveness is key. I just want to say that I understand the notion of why we say that. Here's what I believe. I don't believe that forgiveness has to be key. I don't believe that you have to forgive somebody that has abused you, particularly somebody whose job was to keep you safe. Now, I do believe that you need to break free from that. You need to free yourself from too much resentment towards them, right? You have to take responsibility. You have no choice, right? But forgiveness is giving a certain amount of grace. There's energy in words. If I say I forgive you, right? I'm giving you some grace. I'm giving you some grace. You don't have to give your abuser some grace. You can cut free and move on and say, I cut myself free, but you don't fucking get grace from me. And let me just add this in clearly as well. If the parent is still alive, and they're the type of toxic person that I'm talking about, they are still out there abusing you. They are still out there smear campaigning you, making out that they're the victim, making out that you're the crazy one. I would love to be able to say, we need to get all these families back together. We need to get everybody sat in a room, right? And everybody needs to talk, right? And I think fucking Noel and Liam Gallagher got in a room and they talked, and that's great. But that ain't the fucking same, man. And we need to learn a bit better to know some people do not need to be put back in a room with their fucking abuser, right? So that their abuser can then continue to abuse them. Because they don't, by the way, when they abuse them, they don't sit in the room and fucking call them all the names under the sun. They might if they think they can, but what they'll normally do is place themselves at the victim. Subtle tones, subtle words, cleverly said in the room. You might have a therapist in there, a professional who's trained in a Western modality. Brilliant. They can still be fucking manipulated, particularly by a toxic person who might sit in there and fucking win them over. They might win them over. And now you're sat there and all of a sudden this therapist thinks, you know what, this person's been through some stuff and all they want. And now you've got a professional who we're all taught, fucking believe a professional no matter what, they've fucking been to university or whatever. So now you're sat in a room with a professional and your abuser has managed to get them on board and they're abusing you together and the therapists don't even know it. Yeah? And like somebody said here, and I love it, not forgiven doesn't mean resentment. You can let go of resentment. You can say, I cut the chains of your abuse, right? I don't need to give you grace. I don't need to give you forgiveness, but I'm going over here and I leave you there. Parents or anybody, by the way, yeah? Forgiveness has grace. You do not need to give your abuser grace. Let's fucking say it and sing it together because I believe that to be true. Now, just as a side point, forgiveness is also great. Right? Is also great. If you find it, great. I'm not saying don't forgive. I'm saying find what works for you. I'm saying find what works for you. I'm not saying don't do anything or even do anything. But even this, and again, by the way, I'm not pointing to anybody with this, but I like to unpack stuff. So someone says here, Sophie says here, I always say love people from a distance. I think we even need to be careful with that because if we're not careful, I think we're tricking ourselves into saying we should love people no matter what, right? So we know, don't say to somebody, love somebody no matter what, because you can't tell somebody that they should love their abuser no matter what, right? You shouldn't love a mum and dad no matter what. You shouldn't have to, right? And you don't even have to love them from afar. Now, listen, every situation is completely different. Well, not completely different. They all have similarities, but every situation comes with its own complexities, right? So you may find yourself in a situation where you love them from afar. And again, I think that's great. And I think if that's what you find peace in and that's where you go, fantastic. But the person next to you may move on and they may find freedom not loving them. They may say they have to, they may go, do you know what? I've taken everything into account and the only way to love myself and maybe love my family, maybe love whatever circle I've built here now is to disconnect and to not love. And that's okay too, man. That's okay too. Let me say this. Let me say this. Like, when I think about my own kids, because it's easier to think about my own kids, because I don't think very highly of myself. So if I use myself as an example, I don't know how close I am to loving myself in the way that I feel like we're supposed to. But if I think about my kids, what do I want my kids? I want my kids to see the human beings in their life. I want my kids to see the human beings for who they are. All right. And then I want my kids to say, I'm going to put myself first and then decide if you get to be part of that. And you see the difference here. You see the difference here. There's a risk. There's a risk that spirituality in the way that it's presented online, there's a risk that it is people-pleasing wrapped in a nice bow. All right? And what people that have grown up in an environment where the parent was the center of the universe, for people that have grown up in that environment, they have learned the only way that they can be lovable is to abandon themselves. like, we need to get to a place where in our relationships, and by the way, I'm not claiming to be there yet, right? I'm doing my best like everybody else, right? But where we need to be able to, we need to be able to present who we truly are and not fear that every fucker's gonna run away. We need to be able to know this is what I'm feeling, and I want to be able to communicate it and not have the fear that when I do communicate it, you're going to love me less, you're going to go. Because then what we do is we twist, we bend, we distort, and we become a different version of ourselves in order for ourselves to be lovable. And our value is innate. You are born love, right? Right? And look at the society that we've created. Like a proper healthy person, by the way, when a baby is born, the baby comes out and it's like, oh my God, I love this more than anything in the world, right? I can't imagine loving anything more than this. We don't think, right, give it 5 years, let's get them in school, see if they can do something good in their life, and then we'll see if they're of any value. However, that is the general societal message. The general societal message in the world that we live in today is from the age of 5, if you don't fucking nail the system that we've created and the path that we've created, if you don't nail it on that, then you are of no value. So like, systems in the world is built against us. Even in the way that we talk about self-love. Like now, self-love is presented like like self-love is something that we teach people. Like, you shouldn't need to be taught self-love. You should be shown under the loving gaze of a loving parent who, the moment you were born, realized that the world exists beyond them, that looked at you most of the time, and I'm a parent myself, so I know how skewed it can get, but most of the time looked at you in every single one of your emotions and was able to mirror love back at you. And you realized that in every single one of my emotions, I am lovable. That you won't run away from me, that you won't abandon me, that you won't become angry, that you won't change your demeanor, you won't change your way no matter what happens, because I am lovable in every single one of my emotions. But most of us don't get that. Because we grow up with parents that don't have the capacity to be present with themselves in certain emotions, and so as a result, they can't be present with us in our emotions. And so what do we get taught as a child? As a 2-year-old child, I don't go, fuck, mum's got a lot on, dad's going through some shit, that's why he can't love me when I'm crying. I go, shit, at some subconscious level, I need to learn not to cry. So what does my body do? Find ways to tell me not to cry when I feel like I want to cry. And then I feel shame when I cry. And so because we can't have difficult, proper, meaningful conversations in our world, in our society, in Western culture anyway, nobody gets to talk about their truth. And so this is why I say I hate people, because I go to a social event, and if you're not careful and it's the wrong social event, everyone's talking shit. No one's talking any truth. And when you're sensitive and you're tuned into things, and you're like, this guy's acting like, and he's fucking miserable, but he's talking about how brilliant everything is, and then you're over tuned in with that, and you're tuned in with that, and you think, this is just too much, man. This is just too much. And I understand that the work here is to not take responsibility, to be able to separate myself, have my autonomy, know that these things are not my responsibility. However, when you see things like that, it's hard, man. These social things become hard. Sorry. I'm not supposed to take like 50 minutes to answer every question. Do you feel like toxic is always the right term? I experienced dysfunction, but it wasn't toxic. Are you using the term toxic rather than abusive? It's a really good question, actually. In most cases, I'm talking about dysfunction, right? Dysfunctional families, which is probably nearly every family. I don't know if functional families exist. The reason I use the word toxic is because what I think you'll find is that if I used the word abuse, a lot of the people that I'm talking to wouldn't believe that that was them, because they think, well, this isn't abuse, what I experienced, right? So I do say abuse, But the reason I use the word toxic is because it feels more reachable. Now, there's an argument that the word toxic is overused in today's society, and I think there's probably a discussion to be had around that. But I feel like one of the things that I try to do is unpack everything as much as I can anyway. And so yeah, like look, I think in general, as in Western society anyway, we get really hung up on words. I think we sort of, we attribute too much meaning to words, and then words get kind of, like, they get overtaken, and then they get used for this, and then they mean one thing, and words are constantly changing and evolving their meaning as well, right? So like crazy, once upon a time had a lot different connotations to what it is now, whereas I think we can say, you know, last night was crazy, and there's not too much like issue with that. So terminology is a difficult one, but the reason I use toxic is because it feels more reachable. What else we got here? My mother occasionally randomly switches to being nice. Is it normal that I then feel guilty that I know I'm cutting contact like my siblings have, even though I know this niceness is just a tactic and temporary? Yeah, well, look, the reason that it's a tactic and the reason that it works is because if you're a normal, empathetic person, when you get a sense that somebody might be struggling with something or somebody's trying to make a change, then it's natural that you're going to feel guilty that you're cutting contact, right? How conscious is that within the toxic person? I think it's more conscious than we probably air publicly, and the reason I would say that is because they sort of know when to switch it on and off, don't they? A toxic person sort of knows when to turn it on and off. So I think it makes sense that you feel guilty. I think also, like, this is the thing as well, yeah, like, I get this shit labeled, like, thrown at me all of the time, like, people are just cutting their family off for fucking no reason now, and it seems like it's happening everywhere. And that's just not been my experience. Like, my experience has been, I just talked to countless people like yourself, like this person that's just said this, who is trying to make their way in what is such a difficult, torrid situation. Trying to make their way in what is such a difficult, torrid situation where they don't just cut and run off and be like, yeah, I don't give a fuck about my family now, I'm free. It's like, what gives me the best chance? What gives me the best chance? Any advice on managing the relationships with family members who are still in contact with my toxic, abusive mother and stepdad? Wholeheartedly believe that they're free to do as they please, but it doesn't stop it from hurting that they tolerate or brush the truth under the carpet. Yeah, really good question, really good topic as well, because this is what happens, right? Within toxic or abusive, dysfunctional systems, you have like the like almost like overtly toxic, horrible people, and then you have like, sometimes you have like the close enabler, which is like sometimes the partner, but then like you have the wider family. Now, you could argue that the wider family are still trapped in the abuse, so they are perhaps the victim of the abuse as well, but it's not quite as simple as that, because if their actions are then impacting you in like a really difficult, negative way, then how do you navigate that as well, right? And that becomes really, really, really difficult. And so I think you have to like come home to yourself and trust your body as much as you can. And I think like when you make decisions on what to do with stuff, and I hope this makes sense, but when you make decisions on what to do for stuff, do what's right for you. Try, if you can, to let go of what everyone's going to think, because I think abusive systems thrive on that, right? Abusive systems thrive on, how do we make this look good to the outside world so that if anybody goes against us, they're the ones that feel like they're doing wrong? And I think that happens all the time with abuse. So as the victim of it and the one that's seeing the truth, I think you have to try and block that out and blank that out and say, how do I do what's right for me? So I don't know how much advice is in there, but as long as you keep validating the fact that what you're doing is right and what you're doing is truth, I think that's the best what you can do. And let's, if we can, talk a little bit about accountability. And so if they are behaving in certain ways that is having a negative impact on you, that is hurting you, right? And they are picking if the conscious naivety over a relationship with you, if they are sweeping things under the carpet to make it easier for them, then they have to take accountability for the negative impact that that might have on the people around them. It's hard to break free from abusive systems. I believe, by the way, to go off on a bit of a tangent here, we have abusive, toxic family systems, but we live in a wider abusive, toxic system in and of itself, right? Where we have the people at the top, the government, right, who abuse their power. There might be some good in them somewhere, but mainly what we see is that they're abusing their power. And what they manage to do is play the siblings off against each other. So we're all running around arguing and falling out with one another. And you have in society, when you look at society in general, whenever there's like a big thing, you know, like the lockdowns and all that happened, you had your golden children, the ones who stood up and were kind of good people, but were like, I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to ignore any abuse that's coming from the top of the power, and I'm going to do the right thing because I'm the golden child. And then they would sometimes fall out with some of the truth seekers who were a little bit like, okay, something can right here. Like, I understand that there's something going on, but also I feel like we're being done over here. And then they would be normally scapegoated, right, as a result of that. And then you'll often see the people within power, even now, they will pick scapegoats, right? So I believe, but what you see at the moment, a lot of it is immigration, right? So we get made to, it's like, oh, it's not because there was the biggest transfer of wealth from the middle classes to the super, super mega rich. Forget that. Forget the fact that we let them get away. Forget the fact that like someone like Amazon pays zero tax, right? Forget the fact that all of the stuff that we do, it's the few thousand that are coming in on the boats. There's your problem. And because the ones in power have that level of power and feel slightly unreachable, a little bit like when you're a child, your parents are your parents. So you sort of, if you blame them and truly admit to yourself that they are the problem, then you're fucked, right? Because they're your support system. So what you tend to do is think, I'm going to go at my brother or my sister and I'm going to make them the problem. They're always naughty at school. And if they weren't naughty at school, then fucking dad wouldn't drink in the way that he did. So we go for our siblings because they're there and we feel like we can reach them and like we can do something about it. And so I think that happens on a societal level, yeah? So we fucking, over the years, it was homeless people for a long time, and then it was kind of drug addiction, and then we go to immigration. Like we're looking at the people in the boats now. Do you remember like 15, 20 years ago, we used to scapegoat Polish people? And then, look, I don't think any of it sort of stops necessarily, but you understand that there's always a new scapegoat that's picked. And it's interesting that even like, I even look at things like, it was just released that suicide is at the highest it's been since 1999. What are the news talking about? Smoking in pub car parks. And it's like, what's more important here? And why the fuck is everybody arguing about smoking in a car park when I really don't care either way when we got this going on over here? And so I think that happens all the time. So like wherever there is a system of which there is power, there will always be an abuse of power. So wherever there is a system where there is a discrepancy in power, so the people at the top hold a lot of power, there will always be dysfunction. There will always be abuse of power. I'm not saying that the system is wrong, actually. I actually think that I think, as far as I can see, we need hierarchy. But what we need within that hierarchy is constant and consistent. Whenever there is big power, whenever there is big money being made, we must question that all of the time. And it's the same within a family system, right? It's the same within a family system. I don't know how I went off on that. I do know how I went off on that tirade. That's what I always do. When are you coming to Belfast? We're hoping to come to Belfast later in the year. Studio 52. We'll come and do a breathwork there. I have toxic parents who I no longer have a relationship with for many reasons, but I do have a mother-in-law who is similar toxic trait. This isn't vocalized by my partner and no boundaries are set, so I'm uncomfortable with her involvement. Any advice? It's difficult, man. When you're seeing it in somebody else's and you're the partner, it's like really difficult to navigate, because you have to start to think about how much of it is triggered by your own experience. So here's something that I probably don't talk about enough, is if you've been on the, and by the way, I'm not saying that your experience is not real. It probably is, right? And we're going to take what you said at face value. And I think you have to just keep saying the truth when that's the situation. Talk about truth. Here's what I see as the truth. You don't have to talk people down. You just go back to truth. So there's that. But if you've been on the end of toxicity and abuse, what can become quite difficult is whenever somebody else displays toxic traits, which all humans do, if you're not careful, it can trigger that part of you that goes, fuck, this person's abusive, and then you run a mile. And then if you're not careful, you think everybody's toxic and abusive. You have to be a little bit wary of that, right? Because that's very much possible. However, the opposite end of that is that you also then question, like, am I going crazy? Or am I seeing this? Do you know what I mean? So it's difficult. Right, I'm going to do one or two more questions and I'm going to wrap up because I want to go home and do bedtime with my kids. Why do I feel terrible if I cut off a family member even though they're unhealthy for me? Okay, there's a couple of reasons for this. I've talked a little bit about them, but let's just talk about it. Of course you feel of course you feel like down and difficult. What terminology did you use? Of course you feel terrible. Of course you feel terrible. This is like something that people should never have to do. You should never have to cut somebody out of your life for this, right? But it's horrible. And if you're a loving person who wants people to get along and wants to be okay with everybody, then it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt. And also, like, it's such a difficult thing to do. It's such a difficult thing to be a loving, kind person whose baseline is to be loving and kind and to want people to be okay. And then to have somebody in your life who fucking seems like they're the opposite. Of course it feels shit, man. Of course you feel terrible. And this is why, like, sometimes we've got like hyper-capitalism that gets its hands on emotional healing, as somebody's put here, or spirituality, and it starts going, you have the power, you fucking do it, take charge, and you know, nobody can affect you, you don't have to feel any pain, and find forgiveness, free yourself. And I fucking don't think I don't think that's how life works. Let me tell you about me, and then I'm going to finish and wrap it up. Let me tell you a little bit. Let me tell you about me, and let me tell you about my truth. I find life hard, man. Like I try and do right, and sometimes I get things wrong. And I started my healing journey actively 12 years ago, 12 and a half years ago. And I think for the first 4 or 5 years, I tried to be an amazing person. I tried to not mess up, to not put a foot wrong. I tried to stop feeling down. I tried to stop feeling like the world was too heavy for me. I even pretended for a while that I was there. I would fucking talk love and light and how I love everybody. I even changed my language, pronounced my T's and stopped swearing, and I don't know what else. But eventually life taught me that that's unrealistic, and that I'd been doing that all of my life, trying to be a version of myself that I thought would make me lovable, likable, and okay. I've reached a place where I'm okay with who I am. I'm okay with who I am. I get stuck in ruts. Sometimes life feels fucking overwhelming, you know? Sometimes I wake up in the morning and I think, I can't fucking live my life like this, man. You know, and I forget all of the good things, and I can't write a gratitude list and go, oh yeah, I've got all this to be grateful for. And I fucking roll through the day. And I go to bed and I think, fuck, I know, I hope tomorrow's better than it was. And sometimes it is, man. And I think that's what it is to be a human. I think if you feel things deeply, then you feel things deeply. I wish I could tell you that if you do my 10-point plan, you'll always feel good. You'll never feel down, and life will feel expansive and brilliant. But it's messy, man. And I can say that I'm an introvert, and I am. And then I can go and hide away from the world, and it feels all right, because if I'm not interacting with people, then none of my trauma or my wounds play out. But I can't do that. I can't live in a shack in the middle of nowhere forever. And even if I did, I'd be in there for a day and then think I feel terribly lonely, and I'd run back to people again. And then within 5 minutes of being with people, I'd be like, I was there, man. I was in the shack. I should have stayed there. My point is that I don't really know what my point is. My point is that life's messy, complex, but it's also a lot of fun as well, isn't it? And so when yeah, shadow work, yeah. And I think this is the big thing. Like, I try to love all of myself. I try to love all of myself. The part of me that wants to go out and fight everybody and say, fuck everyone, they're all idiots, right? That judgmental part of me, it's a strong part of me, it's there. I love that part of me. The part of me that wants to curl up in a ball and run away, I love that part of me. I love all of the parts of me. Like, I love all of the parts of me. And my life is amazing. I love my life. I love my life on the whole. I'm able to show up to it. I feel accountable. I feel like I can largely do the things that I want to do. And that's life. That's life. And if you think you've nailed it, and it's like, yeah, my life is amazing and I'm running free, I don't know, man. If you're anything like me, you'll dip again, and that's life.